I've driven Uber for a couple of years now, and I was actually planning on calling it quits in early 2020. But then you know what hit, and people were avoiding public transport like the plague, pun very much intended, so it didn't really make sense to do anything else for the time being. I still do it today, meaning I've been officially driving for Uber for 3 years and 4 months as of this October, and that time, I think I've given rides to literally thousands of different people. The whole spectrum, the good, the bad, the ugly. I posted a whole bunch of the cooler fares I've had over the subs, like our slash made me smile and our slash off my chest, but I've never really had the chance to answer anything like this before. I don't really like to talk about some of the crazier frightened passengers I've given rides to, and I hope by the end of this you can understand why. But anyway, here's some of the worst, scariest, or generally most frightening passengers I've ever given rides to the first of all the frightening fares I took with the two obviously looking gangbangers carried a very suspicious looking package. The whole way, they talked in low whispers in the back seat, letting out these devious little chuckles every so often. I couldn't quite hear what they were saying, but at one point, I made the mistake of making eye contact with one of them in the back seat. He had face tattoos, and when we locked eyes, his compadre fell silent. He then pipes up, asking if I get into any trouble. We're about the same age, and I can feel him sizing me up with the question, trying to see if I'm going to give him a punk answer or not. I just give him one syllable. No. My intention being to engage him as little as possible. I couldn't have even taken his ride request, but the display picture he was using was pre-face tattoo. You could tell it was the same guy, but it was most definitely a bamboozle. Anyway, this guy almost acts like I'd given him the opposite answer, because he follows up with if I had to shoot somebody. I don't even carry a gun in the car, let alone ever had to shoot anyone. So again, I just gave him a one-word answer. Now, he and his buddy think this is hilarious, and there's more low speech in the back seat before the guy says he was good to shoot someone. I mean, Bill's powerful. Immediately, I start getting nervous. I didn't think they were going to pull anything, but I definitely wanted to get the ride over as quickly as possible. I had no idea how far the little encounter was going to escalate. And like I said, if I had any inkling, I'd never pick the guy up in the first place. We stopped at a red light, and I can see one of the guys in the back shifting around, taking something out of the bag they were carrying. But like I said, I just had no suspicion they were about to do what they did. The next thing I know, as the light goes green and we get moving again, I hear the mouthy kid laughing to himself, only it sounds like closer in my ear than it had been before. So just as I'm thinking, he's not leaning towards me, as I got something cold and metallic pushing into the back left in my head. I knew what it was almost immediately. I didn't need to hear the hammer being cocked to know. Then, I'm not sure if this is exactly what he said, but it's in the gist of it. He said, "If I shot you right now, the speed you think we'd die to." I honestly couldn't tell you how long it took me to come up with an answer. Could have been seconds, but I swear it felt like a whole couple of minutes, just sitting there, weirdly calm, thinking I might die tonight. Yeah, my heart was pounding when this weird kind of survival instinct took over, and I just thought, screw you guys. If I go, we all go. Like I said, I didn't answer at first because my first reaction was to put my foot down. By the time the speedometer read 50, I just said, yep, at the speed. There's no way he'd survive. I felt the gun still pressed into the back of my head for a few seconds as they laughed, and the guy in the back seat only took it away when I ran a red light. Both of them thought this was equally hilarious, but I think the mouthy guy dropped his poker face for a second when he was like, chill, was just a joke, homie. I kept our speed with a 50 until I pulled up outside the destination, still shaking as I parked up to let them out. Face tattoo guy had stashed the gun somewhere by then. He gave me some smug smile and said, "Stay out of trouble," or something equally obnoxious as he got out of the back seat. I didn't touch my phone for a minute or two as he and his buddy crossed the street and walked into a bodega. Then, the second he was at the site, I called the cops. That's the thing that always gets me about this incident. Like, what did he think I was going to do after he shoved a gun to my head? Drive off and carry on with my night? The cops are on the scene in more than a couple of minutes. I didn't even recognize them at first. I just saw two more guys with guns jump out of what turned out to be an undercover car. And it wasn't until I spotted the badges around their necks that I realized they were cops. They were smart too. They didn't just burst in and try to grab the guy. They waited until we walked out, both hands full of whatever snack and Slurpee he bought. They got him into cuffs without so much as shots fired. Some may call me a snitch. I call them idiots, because it's one thing to have those gangbanger dillweeds shooting and killing each other, but threatening civilians is something I won't stand for. I'm not some tough guy. I just hate bullies, as I always have. Now, the next one that springs to mind seems like it might have been more sad than anything. As I picked this lady up, she was in tears, clearly in a great deal of distress, so I tried to stay respectful, offering her a Kleenex, but otherwise kept the chat to a minimum. Then, about halfway through the ride, she gets a call. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but you just can't help yourself, sometimes. You gotta turn the radio down so they can talk. There's literally nothing else going on noise-wise apart from the traffic outside. So as I'm listening to her speak, I gather that she's probably talking to her husband, or at least an ex-husband, and they just had some kind of argument. I'm not sure what about it. Definitely seemed like the husband was doing most of the talking, and the vast majority of her contributions were like, "No, Tom, you can't do that. Tom, I won't accept that." She's trying to talk sometimes, but he's cutting her off. And I'm starting to tune out when she suddenly blurts out, "Tom, if you do that, are the kids? I swear to God, I thought I misheard her at first." I was honestly like, no way that she just say that. But she did, because she said it again. And whatever the argument was ended. She apparently wanted with that round. Shortly after, she said bye to whoever it was and hung up. I didn't say another word to her. I was rigid, imagining what those words might entail. Then I remembered my eyes flickering to my Uber app, and I suddenly remembered where I was supposed to be taking her. It was Duane Reade, like the pharmacy chain. I didn't call the cops on her. I imagined her husband or whoever was on the phone had seen to that. But I did pull over, told her to get out, and promised to refund her money. She tried to make out like she'd already paid me, but as some of you may know, that's not the case. I canceled the fare, told her I wasn't moving the car until she got out, and after a brief standoff, she ended up walking. I don't know what kind of messed up situation she was in or if I could stop it, but I sure couldn't make it, so I wasn't a part of it. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. This happened back in 1989, and the story involves my stepdad, biological dad, Donald Duck, and my sister, Sis. The person who exacted the revenge has passed now, so it should be safe to relate. And this is a revenge story that would warrant prison time, I believe. I was living outside the country when it happened, so my sister relayed all this information to me about a year after. And we recently got together and went over the events again. So my biological parents married when they were very young, and Donald Duck was still in law school. The marriage lasted long enough to produce 2 children. They didn't waste time in those days. My sister, who was 14 months, my elder, and myself. They were divorced before I was born. And Donald was a serial cheater, a pathological liar, and a total asshole. He still is at least a liar and an AR. He's in his mid-70s now, so maybe not doing much cheating anymore, but the fact that he is still working as a lawyer, I think has indicated that he was never a good one, and he doesn't have enough to retire. I've looked at reviews on him online, and it's funny to see that most reviewers say that he is not only a terrible lawyer, but a horrible person. When Sis was 22, she was a single mother, and my nephew, her son, was around 3. Her company transferred her to another state, and she discovered that Donald Duck lived in a town near her new work location, and thought that he might be able to help her get out of bearings in a new place. For a short time when we were teenagers, we had some sporadic involvements in our lives after moving to a neighboring city. It was mostly him trying to impress us with how cool and rich he thought we should think he was. So though it has been a few years since she had seen him, it was not like they were strangers. In any case, Donald Duck agreed to let Sis move into his apartment with him, his girlfriend at the time, of course, many years his junior, and her 9-month-old child, not Donald's, until she was able to find her place. He also offered to allow her to keep her belongings in his storage unit. Says took him up on his offer. Never did Donald Duck make any reference to being paid for the use of the storage unit or paying for utilities at the apartment. Says stayed for 3 months and did her best to get out as quickly as she could. And as far as she could once, she became more familiar with the area. Living with him was hard. Did I mention he was an asshole? And her young son would find his pregnant lady porno mags around the apartment. This is pre-internet. Mr. Duck's young girlfriend was able to help with babysitting, something Sis paid her for. Eventually, she got her apartment. But all of her things, her son's toys, her furniture, household items, and everything. But her bed was still in the storage unit. So she called him to figure out how she could get her things back. But he seemed to want to hang on to them for some reason. He said, "You are my girlfriend's money for babysitting, and you can't get your things back until you pay her." She said, "Have you talked to her?" "I've paid her everything I owed her." He put down the phone and talked to his girlfriend, and she confirmed that she had been paid. And then he said, "Well, you owe 1/3 of the utilities for the time you were here." She reminded them that he had never said anything about that. So he got a little heated, and she was feeling desperate and angry. She then shouted an accusation of something he did to her when she was very young, which is a different story. And he responded, "Have you ever told anyone that?" "No," she said. "If you ever do, I will break your neck," he said. And the conversation ended there. She had given up and thought she would never see her things again. When about 20 minutes later, she got a call from an acquaintance who had gone on 1 or 2 dates with Donald before she met my sister. She told Sis that Mr. Duck just called her, asking if Sis had ever told her anything he might have done to Sis, hinting at the accusation Sis had made since I had never told anyone, and the acquaintance told Donald as much as later calls my stepdad, whom we have always is considered to be our dad. And he was the only father we knew growing up, as he was in the picture before we were old enough to remember. He married my mom when I was an infant, and my sister a toddler, and they were together for many years until my mom's death. The guy's had a lot of faults. He passed away in 2017, and we often felt better when he wasn't around. But he tried. It's not easy raising someone else's kids. He was our dad as far as we were concerned, and he'd legally adopted us. He had a lot of issues, but he hated to see anyone being taken advantage of if they were in a weaker position. In other words, he hated a bully, and Donald Duck was being a bully. When I was in the 1st grade, I rode a school bus with middle and high school students. There were a couple of kids who would bully me, and when he found out, he confronted the bullies and dads, and it ended. Another time, I was in 3rd grade and driving somewhere with him in his pickup around town, and he saw 2 young teenagers destroying a bicycle that he assumed they had stolen. He stopped and confronted them with his big framing hammer. Years later, he broke my mom out of a mental institution by threatening the director or some doctor, I'm not sure, with that same hammer. Yes, we were a fun family. Anyway, when Sis called him explaining that Donald Duck was holding all of her possessions hostage, she didn't know what to do. He told her that he knew several crisps who would be happy to rough him up and wouldn't even want to be paid. They would just do it for the fun. He was very bothered that Donald was keeping his grandson's things from him and wanted to hurt Mr. Duck. But Sis declined his offer. Then he asked her, what is the thing he values most in the world? His car. She said his car at that point was a Porsche. He had purchased new just a few years before. It wasn't quite the absolute entry-level model, but pretty close. Of course, he had all kinds of arguments about why it was better than more expensive ones, and obviously it was red. Dad was trying to come up with a way to not only get revenge, but to scare Mr. Duck enough to force him to give Sis back her things. She said she was fine with whatever he wanted to do if it got her belongings back, but wanted to make sure none of it could be traced back to her. So nothing happened until about a month later, and Donald Duck called Sis out of the blue as if nothing had happened and asked, "Hey, when would you like to come get your things? How about this Saturday?" He had some change of heart that is unexplained to this day. So she said, sure. She didn't trust him. So she didn't want to go alone. She was able to get a male friend to go with her, and she got a U-Haul, picked up her stuff, and got out. That very same evening, she tried several times to call Dad to let him know that she got her things back, and all was well. No need for any drastic measures. But it was too late. The wheels had been set in motion. He never answered the phone. Remember, these are pre-cell phone days, so when you're not at home, you don't answer. Sis called Mom, who was living separately from Dad for a time. It's complicated, and told her she couldn't reach Dad. Mom said Dad was sick, and that's probably why he wasn't answering his phone. But then at 10:30 p.m., Sis got a call from Donald's girlfriend who asked her, "What are you doing?" "I'm at home in bed. Why?" She said someone just blew up Donald's car. My sister's heart dropped. She knew who did it. The police asked Donald who would want to do this to him, and he says his name. So she now becomes suspect number 1. Sis asked their girlfriend if Donald was scared, and girlfriend said yes. They were spending the night in a hotel. Fortunately, the call from my girlfriend to Sis just a few minutes after the explosion gave us her alibi. Sis lived over 30 minutes away and couldn't have answered her home phone if she had been the one to ignite the bomb. But the bomb did its job well. It had turned the Porsche into an unrecognizable wreck, took out the adjacent car, and destroyed many feet of the carport above both cars. I'm guessing the tank in a Porsche was nearly full. Just after Sis got off the phone, she called Mom telling her that someone blew up Mr. Duck's car, and she thinks it was Dad. While she was on the phone with Mom, another call came in, and it was Dad. He said mysteriously, "There's a box outside your door. Bring it in. You never talked to me tonight." Sis was a little afraid to open the box, but it turned out just to be some of her son's items that he had left with his grandpa's clothes and toys. Months later at Christmas, Sis asked Dad about it and he confessed. Turned out he was very sick physically when he pulled that stunt. Sis was touched that he would go through so much effort and risk jail time for her, all while being ill. She asked him if he was scared of driving back, and he said yes, and that every headlight behind him he took to be a cop until he reached the state line. Sis found out from their girlfriend that the cop said the job was very amateur, certainly not the work of a professional, but hey, it did the job. That Todd said he had asked a coworker who was once a member of the after-mentioned Crisps about how to make a car bomb, and she instructed him. He always did love blowing things up. When I was 13, we bonded over crumpling up the old colored sparklers into powder. I don't think they make the colored ones anymore, but they burned hotter, and we funneled the powder into the spent CO2 cart used, and making bombs powerful enough to blow up those old metal milk cans that hold a few gallons. We did this for the 4th of July. Anyway, Sis said it was some sort of Molotov cocktail stuffed in the tailpipe, but I'm not sure how that would work. My idea of a Molotov cocktail is a 750 milliliter size bottle like a wine bottle or a fifth of booze, which would not fit into the tailpipe of a 4-cylinder Porsche. I'm guessing the diameter is no more than 2 inches? Not big enough to fit such a bottle. Maybe he used a similar bottle or simply a smaller container of some kind filled with something very ignitable. I truly regret not discussing it with him. But we weren't close since I left home. If you didn't need him, he had a hard time having a relationship with you. Plus, I was married to a woman for many years who kept me from my parents and siblings, so I don't have better details. Thank God that 25-year marriage is over, and my current wife loves my family. One hilarious detail. Donald Duck continued to father offspring and date very young women. His current wife is my age. Exactly. And he has a daughter many years younger than my youngest child. A couple of years ago, I had a conversation with one of these half-sisters, and she's a marvelous person despite half her DNA. Her mother was never married to Donald, and this sister is the age of my youngest daughter. I told her the story of the exploded Porsche, and she found it very amusing, because she said Donald loves to tell a story about he was prosecuting some mob boss and a couple of thugs came to his door trying to threaten him. Of course, being the big, bad, brave man he is, he didn't back down. And what was his reward? Those thugs blew up his car. I think it's hilarious that he tells this story to his children. But now they know the truth. He's the biggest bullshitter I've ever met. Also, due to Donald's allegations that it was my sister who blew up his car, the condo association or whatever tried to sue my sister for the damage to the carport, but it came to nothing. They were grasping at straws because there was no evidence, of course. But it did scare them and cause her some anxiety. I'm an 80s girl, not like some millennial who just likes the aesthetic. No, I literally grew up in the 80s, a time for cell phones, internet, satellite TV, when the only thing you could get delivered to your door was milk or pizza. It does seem kind of surreal thinking about it now, just how slowly things changed over the years. And let me tell you what we do. I wish we had some of the things we had back when I was a teenager. It sure would have saved me a lot of trouble from time to time. And this story is one of them. Until I'd saved up enough money for my own car, I'd have to walk to and from work whenever I couldn't wrangle myself up a ride. And that turned out to be most days. Then, this one night, I'm 18, and I'm making the regular walk back to my parents' house when the heavens decide to open up on me. Out of absolutely nowhere, to pure Noah's Ark level of rain that had me running for cover. I mean, don't get me wrong, some rain I'm good to walk in, but this was like I'm going to drown levels of rain. So I thought it was better just to take shelter and let it subside a little, but it didn't at all. If anything, it just got more intense. This older guy pulled up alongside me in his car to offer me a ride. God knows how he spotted me. I jumped in at the chance. I saw what was obviously a Bible just sitting there on the dash, and I bet anyone who would have done the same as me and accepted the ride without so much as a second thought. But it didn't take me long to realize I'd made a very, very bad decision. So I got to open the passenger side door of the guy's car. The handle creaks and groans, but doesn't respond right away. This prompts the guy to open up his own door, which seems to open the first time to tell me that he's been having problems with her for years and that I need to really pull. I do, and give the thing a good yank. Hearing a metallic screech, the door finally opens up so I can climb inside and out of the rain. He apologizes and tells me the doors are a real son of the gun. how it doesn't open from the inside and then the windows won't roll down either. He literally tells me this when it's too late to do anything about it. And although I'm not nearly ready to freak out or whatever, the fact that I'm technically trapped definitely made me feel less comfortable. But still, it politely asked me where I'm headed before we make a little small talk about how the rain hadn't been this bad in years. After a while, he began complimenting my uniform, my hair, and told me I looked like his late wife and that her spirit must have led him to help me get home. Sure, that's one heck of a red flag right there. But at the time, I don't know. It just came across as sweet as all like a lonely older guy who pinned for a late wife. And you can see where I'm coming from right now anyway. Talk then moved to if it was still in school, what my hobbies were, and gradually turned to whether or not I was on my period. Don't ask me how I have no idea how the conversation got to that point. But he wasn't weird about it. And it still seemed natural. I know that sounds crazy, but trust me. It's like he was about to make a joke or something, and it was about as wholesome as period conversations got. And the way he talked was like parental, if that makes any sense. Needless to say, I didn't freak out until he said very calmly, because once you blossom into a woman, you should start a family as soon as you're able. As unregistering what he'd said, he goes on to tell me that he believes that God plans to keep him lonely for years, like a test or something. But now, because I look so much like his late wife, who was clear, I was meant to be his. So we could start life over again and finally have lots of children like his wife was unable to. Then, as I'm staring straight ahead, just feeling my stomach slowly tying itself into knots, he takes my hand, kisses it, and says something like it's going to be magical, taking you to bed again. Like many girls before me, and doubtless many girls to come. I was faced with the inevitable task of keeping calm enough to keep my captor chill, or coming up with a plan to get out of there safely. And let me tell you, that's not easy to do when all your brain is saying is panic, panic, panic. My first line of defense was feigning surprise, like, oh dang, I forgot to clock out of work. Well shucks, looks like I'm going to have to get out of here and walk back. But he responds by telling me it could wait until tomorrow. My second line of defense is telling them that I had to pee real bad, and that's harder to hold when it's that time of the month. I think I was trying to appeal to that parental side that I thought I saw. Turns out that was my second serious mistake. He told me I could hold it until we got home. Only the way he said it, he didn't sound so sweet, and the more the words "we in home" cut like a knife, and with that, it became obvious that he had absolutely no intention of letting me out of the car. I'm as quiet as a mouse by this point. I've never felt that kind of fear before. So I'm half catatonic as he carries on jabbering about how our lives are going to be. I can actually feel my skin crawl as he tells me that who have to teach me to do things his way, how girls these days don't know how to act. According to him, the husband was boss, and what he said goes, while his wife's job is to simply submit and obey. It's all right there in the good book, he declared at one point, and twice jabbed a finger into the leather binding on the dash. That's when his idea just burst into life in my head. One that took me all the way back to the handful of Sunday school lessons I had as a kid. If this guy wanted to marry me, he needed my father's permission. Otherwise, our marriage bed wouldn't be holy, or something like that. I mean, I knew that for a fact. So I innocently made the point as non-confrontationally as I could, and from the period of silence that followed, I knew I'd struck a nerve. When he finally spoke again, he talked down to me, saying he knew the Bible much better than I did, that obviously he was going to ask for my father's permission. Then we got to the street where I previously told him I lived. He asked which house is my parents'. I gave him a fake house number far away from mine and had him drop me off there. He wanted to come inside. I told him I needed to let my parents know that God had sent me a husband. He couldn't just walk up in there uninvited if he wanted my dad to say yes to the whole thing. I said it might take a few days to convince them that they should come back tomorrow. He responds with, I'll give you a few minutes, but we need to be on our way." I told him to drive around the block so I could have time to pack my clothes. He nodded, and finally opened the car door. I ran to the house door, waving him until we drove away, then sprinted to my actual house where I told my parents everything. The cops were called, and we watched as they showed up and talked to the guy before they just let him go. I was furious, but apparently he just told them that he had given me a ride home and had no idea what I was talking about when it came to all the kidnap and marriage stuff. We were assured that his details had been taken and that if he tried anything, he'd be easy to get in touch with. But if there was actually a next time, it might not just be him they have to find, it might have been my body too. Thankfully, I never saw him again. But in the future, I insisted on waiting at work until my boyfriend could pick me up. Failing that, I'd just cough up the money for a cab, even if it did cut into my tips. I mean, there'd be no spending cash that if I was locked in some fundamentalist basement, right? The point is that be careful whose car you're getting into, girls, because you really never know who's actually sitting behind the wheel. And the people who came across as the kindest can sometimes be anything but.